Warmest welcome to everyone. I am Christine Kuneva-Walker from New Globe Films. I cannot believe it's been 7 years since we launched the annual Women's Media Summit, now the State of Media Summit. Our first meeting was held in Provincetown, Massachusetts, where we gathered 100 thought leaders to understand the barriers to gender justice in entertainment media and to brainstorm effective strategies for knocking them down. We had hurricane conditions, but out of the storm came several strategies that are outlined in the report that you'll receive today. We also emerged with a commitment to holding our industries accountable for representation in media. 7 years later, here we are still holding the industry accountable. And it also means that my friendship with Caroline Heldman, my co-founder of the Media Summit, has also weathered the test of time. And I'm proud to be here with you and to join our other friends who've had multi-year commitments to this endeavor as well. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Christine. It is wonderful now 7 years later to be talking about the state of media, and mostly wonderful to be looking at the progress that has been made. Obviously, we have a long way to go. I want to thank the co-sponsors, so CME, and we have representatives from CME here who will be talking about their work today, as well as Mount St. Mary's University and Ken Kinney, who has been a very gracious partner in all things media and representation related over the years. And of course, the Representation Project, which is a gender justice organization fighting for better inclusion in media and fighting against gender norms and stereotypes. And for folks who have a question about whether or not this will be recorded, just to reiterate, yes, it will. You can share it with friends and family. And we're going to open with a video from the Representation Project founder, Jennifer Siebel-Newsome, who has some words to share about what we will be discussing today.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jennifer Siebel-Newsome, founder and chief creative officer of the Representation Project, and I'm honored to have been invited to speak to you at this State of the Media Summit. It's heartening and encouraging to see so many talented individuals gather together virtually who understand both the profound power of media to shape our lives and the urgency to change the destructive ways that it shapes us. It's already been a decade since we premiered our documentary, Misrepresentation. Misrepresentation ignited a national conversation about how girls and women are both dangerously misrepresented and underrepresented in media, as well as its impact on society. And as I traveled the world discussing misrepresentation and seeing its impact, I was struck by the constant questions and concerns about the way that our media and culture negatively impacts boys and men. And it was those conversations that led us to make the documentary The Mask You Live In, which started another national conversation, this time about the causes and consequences of toxic masculinity. And of course, our latest documentary, Fair Play, tackles gender norms and the pressing issue of gender inequality at home. Women have historically shouldered domestic and care work in the house, even though children, families, and society benefit from equality at home. And there's a reason nearly 5 million women left the workforce during the pandemic, with 2 million still out. So as we've created our films and social impact campaigns, I've been continuously lifted up and inspired by the tireless work of so many of you here at this event who've dedicated your lives to tackling these issues. Working together, we've made progress. But of course, we still have a long ways to go. Yes, we've raised awareness. That is the first step. And again, it's only half the battle. The other half is making real and measurable change in media content. That is what the Representation Project State of Media Summit is all about. So as we set our sights on the obstacles we still have to overcome, I think it's important to take a moment to celebrate some of our victories. Last year, Jane Campion was awarded the Oscar for Best Director for Power of the Dog. This year, Sarah Polley won Best Adapted Screenplay for Women Talking, and 2 incredibly talented actresses, over 50, swept awards season for Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. We are making progress, and most importantly, we're making progress with intersectionality. But of course, we're here today because our work is not nearly done. We can't just lift one type of woman up. We need to see diversity in race, age, class, ethnicity, sexual orientation, geography, ability, body size, you name it. That is what intersectional representation looks like. Unfortunately, most media still reflects dangerously limiting cultural norms and stereotypes. It promotes toxic masculinity for boys, causes body hatred and shame in girls, and self-hatred in gender non-conforming youth. As Emma Lazarus put it, until we are all free, none of us are free. So I'm committed to this marathon push for intersectional gender justice and consciousness in media and our larger culture, and I look forward to working with each and every one of you every step of the way. Onwards and upwards, and have a great summit.
Okay, well, we are moving along to the research portion. Just to give you a sense of the agenda, Rebecca Cooper, who is the Director of Research at the Representation Project, is going to be sharing the latest findings from our State of Media report card. And then we will be hopping into what is sure to be an incredible panel discussion. And I am yep, technologically right exactly where I need to be right now. Don't you worry about it. So Becca, let's turn the floor over to you. Tell us about the state of media.
All right. So hello, everyone. My name is Rebecca, and it is my honor and privilege to get to share with you the research that we've compiled for this year's State of Media report card. So we've had the ability to do this a few years now, and what the State of Media report card is a way to examine the current state of media representations across film, television, advertising, video games, and music. And across all of those types of media, we're looking to benchmark data for representations for gender, race, ethnicity, and skin tone. Age, we're specifically looking at representations of characters over 50, disability, body size, we want to see representations of fat characters, and we use the term fat in a way, just a quick disclaimer, we are among a growing movement of organizations and activists that are reclaiming that word and believe that the word fat doesn't have any stigma attached to it. And then also, of course, looking into representations of sexuality. And this particular report compiles existing data from all of these incredible organizations that you see here on the screen. For the most part, we tried to use any data we could find for each of these data points and the most accurate data point when possible. So let's start. I'm going to give you a brief overview of each of these identities, just some of the highlights. The full report has goes into a lot more detail, but we'll start here with gender. So gender in film. When we talk about women in film for 2022, women make up half of the US population, but only 38% of characters in the top films from 2022. So we still see a need for more representation in film. And this graph is showing us screen time. So you can see actually when women are showing up in film, they get even less actual face time on screen. So 30.9% in 2020, and we don't see any improvement over the decade either. When it comes to behind the scenes in film, we also know that women are missing. So we've seen a sharp decline for women film directors and women screenwriters in this last year. We saw a little tiny bit of improvement for women film producers, but overall not anywhere close to achieving parity behind the scenes for women. When it comes to TV, a little bit better, 45% of TV characters were women. So we're really close to achieving parity for women in TV, which is awesome. When it comes to screen time, we have more room for improvement. Even though 45% of characters in TV were women, they received only 36.1% of screen time in 2022. So not great. But behind the scenes, though, this is a positive finding. We see that for women, we're doing a lot better when it comes to women TV directors and writers specifically. We've got a little more room to grow with creators, but we do see a trend towards parity for behind the scenes in television when it comes to gender. Let's take a quick look at another finding, which is positive, although not perfect. We want to see parity for women characters in video games, and we're not there yet, but we did see a big jump in this study that came out in 2022. 39% of video game characters were women, so that is awesome. All right, a quick look at race and skin tone, starting with film. So when it comes to BIPOC characters in film, we're going to keep the good positive train rolling with a positive finding that BIPOC characters achieved parity in film in 2022, which is awesome. 42.9% of characters in film were BIPOC, and the US population that we benchmarked to is 39.9% of the US population is BIPOC. Another positive finding when we look at screen time. So this is screen time for characters with darker skin tones, and we have the highest percentage of the decade this last year in 2022, with 43% of screen time going to characters of darker skin tones. All right, when it comes to BIPOC behind the scenes, not as great. Similar to the finding for gender and behind the scenes in film, film directors and screenwriters are mostly white. We did see a little tiny bit of improvement here, but not great, not anywhere close to achieving parity behind the scenes in a film. For TV, a better finding, we have 37.8% of TV characters in 2022 were BIPOC. So awesome, moving towards parity, still have some room to go. When it comes to screen time, behind the scenes, yes, I got ahead of myself. Behind the scenes in television, yes, BIPOC. So we see a pretty sharp decline here for BIPOC TV creators, which is not good. We want to see more of that, but positive findings for directors and writers. We're almost achieving parity behind the scenes. So of course, we would love to see more of that. Another finding, we looked into advertising, and you can see in this graph that in this chart that in 2017 and 18, we achieved parity for BIPOC characters in advertising, but we've seen a trend away from parity in the years since, with a low of 27.5% in 2022. So advertisements are getting wider, and that's something that needs to change. All right, let's move on to sexuality. So a couple data points for you of the state of media when it comes to LGBTQ+ characters. The first finding is for film. LGBTQ+ people make up 7.1% of the US population and only 2.6% of characters in film. But in the next slide, a positive finding, TV does a lot better this last year, and actually LGBTQ+ characters were well represented when it comes to television. We had 11.9% compared to 7.1% of the population. Not as great of data stories for disability. Unfortunately, for TV and film, we see similar trends. Starting with film, 2.1% is pretty dismal, especially when 26% of the US population has some type of cognitive, communication, physical, or mental illness disability. So we need to see a lot of improvement when it comes to representations of people with disabilities. And the same thing in TV, actually slightly worse. Only 0.7% of TV characters in 2022 were depicted with some type of disability. All right, moving on to age. So again, this is specifically looking at older characters and representations of adults over 50. So here, looking at film, we can see that for the entire decade, we've seen older adults underrepresented in film, and no progress has been made, with only 16.4% of characters in 2022 being over 50. And again, 34.2% of the US population is over 50. So that's what we're trying to get to, not close in film, a little better in TV, but still we have a ways to go until we achieve parity. And lastly, a look into body size, so representations of fat characters. First, we'll take a look at film. 42.5% of the US population is classified as fat or has a large body type. And in film in 2022, only 13% of characters had a large body type. When you look at screen time for characters with a large body size, you can see there's a massive gap. So even though 13% of those characters were fat characters only received 3.3% of screen time in 2022. And this has been the case for the entire decade. And you'll see the same data story in TV. 12.8% of characters in popular television in 2022 were fat. And the next slide will show you that the same issue is happening with screen time. Only 3.5% of screen time went to characters of large body types. So that is my presentation for you. There's a lot more data. We go into representations of music industry and more on all of that. If you want more, the report is published to the website. But it is my honor to turn it over to our fantastic panelists. So Caroline, thank you for the time.
Thank you, Becca. Lightning speed, great data stories, a lot of improvement, but also identifying where the benchmarks tell us there's a lot of work to be done. So head on over to the Representation Project website at www.therepproject.org and download the report, which, as Becca noted, has a lot more detail. Let's jump into our fantastic panel. It is my honor and pleasure to introduce this panel. Let's start with Joy, producer, writer, and strategist dedicated to the psycho-spiritual power of storytelling. The best opening line of a bio. Her work has been featured in W, HuffPo, Vogue Italia. She is the co-founder of CME, which is the Center for Intersectional Media and Entertainment. If you are not already familiar with CME, so that's CME, C-I-M-E. This organization researches the stories we have inherited through entertainment media and how they make us feel. Joy's first book, Beyond Brand, dives into the intersection of personal development and personal branding, and her latest short documentary, Inseparable from the Sunlight, shines a lens on our innate human connection to plants, the earth, and our cosmos. She also has another book, Show Us Your Fire, which examines the power of disruption and our birthright to self-compassion. She also serves on the NASA Astrophysics database of idea practitioners. Welcome, Joy, virtual clapping, going in alphabetical order. I hope I did that right. Dr. Nicole Haggard is an award-winning instructor, speaker, and published researcher with over 20 years of study contextualizing the intersection of race and gender in American culture. Dr. Nicole is a faculty member at the Film, Media, and Social Justice program at Mount St. Mary's University, which of course is a partner with this, with the State of Media Summit. Dr. Nicole is a faculty fellow at the Center for the Advancement of Women. She also spent time as a director of communications for the Gina Davis Institute on Gender and Media. And I know we have some of the great folks from the Gina Davis Institute here. Welcome, welcome. She also spent time as the co-founder for the Center for Intersectional Media and Entertainment, and a featured expert for outlets like TEDx, Variety, and South by Southwest. She recently completed a groundbreaking research project with Amazon Films and the Sea Change Institute, and will be releasing her monograph, Race, Sex, and Hollywood. Monica Lay is our next panelist. Welcome, Monica. She's a co-founder of CME and an independent film producer, or producer beyond film, I should say. Her current film and TV projects include An Oakland Holiday, which was featured on the latest Blacklist. Monica's producing credits include The Art of Self-Defense, The Clove Hitch Killer, and the documentary Reporter, the Marion Stokes Project. Monica was previously the Senior Vice President of Film at Miramax. She oversaw the development and production of features like He's All That and Mother Android. Just everything you've been a part of is amazing, Monica, seriously. She joined Miramax from MGM, where she worked on Candyman. Okay, I don't know, maybe not huge into horror. Legally Blonde and other legendary franchises. So yes, you know Monica's work. She's just worked on so many hit shows and films, just amazing. And last but certainly not least, my State of Media Summit co-founder, Christine Walker, an award-winning feature film producer and the CEO of the former CEO of the Provincetown Film Society, where all of this started. She has also been associated with basically every major project. You have been nominated for Academy Awards, and I want to, your eyes are going over here, maybe even won one. So we're going to go into, we're actually going to talk more about your projects, because I want to talk about what new projects you are working on right now. But let's jump into the panel with an opening question for Nicole. You have been teaching and researching and advocating in the representation and media space for, well, I had in my note over a decade, but it's actually 2 decades. Okay, we're not going to talk about that. Tell us about the progress you have seen, like what really gets your juices flowing and inspires you to continue this action, and also maybe identify some areas that are just really intransigent that we just haven't seen much progress made.
Hi, everyone. So great to be here. Thank you, Caroline. So I think for me, one of the most exciting things now is just seeing the intersectionality between different worlds. So at CME, we're really invested in like what we call our 5As. But for example, like I'm an academic. And so the people that are invested in the research, and there's a lot of great organizations doing that, like the Representation Project and the Gina Davis Institute, to name a few. And then there's people like Monica who are really involved in like producing stuff, and the artists and the allies in the industry. And then people like Joy who are like change makers, thought leaders, like all three. And we are really invested in activist organizations, which the Representation Project does both. So we love you guys for that. But seeing these groups come together in ways that I hadn't seen before. For example, Color of Change just hit us up recently, and they're doing a really amazing, they're a racial justice organization, and they're doing a really amazing representation move, right? So it's like seeing people from different lanes coming together to create these really intersectional and holistic approaches to how do we talk about why does representation matter and how do we change it? And so it's like a both and happening that I'm super excited about and hadn't seen before. And then also expanding our ideas of why representation matters. I always talk about Becca and how she's like pushing the fat issue, right? But body size, age, I heard about body size and age this year way more than I had in years past. And so just everyone really expanding their ideas of how do we come up with the solutions and like what is the problem in the first place, and seeing that more holistically as well. I'm super excited about. And then the piece about the students that I think I saw this year more than in years past is not students who are like, I want to make content, but students being like, I want to be part of this movement. And I think that's like a really interesting shift that's happening, is that they're really contextualizing the ways in which what shows up on screen impacts them personally and impacts our society, and they want to be a part of that change. And so that's exciting for me in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, and isn't it great to be in the classroom too, where you have your finger on the pulse of, okay, it's what's coming next.
Yeah.
And it feels like this is a bigger movement than it's felt for a few decades.
Yeah. Sure.
And Monica, I don't know from your vantage point whether you're feeling the same thing. You have worked in the industry for over a decade. What can you tell us about initiatives to make content more inclusive? Have they worked? What works? What doesn't work? Are you hopeful about where things are going?
I sing a very different tune from Nicole, I think. But it's a pretty scary time in the industry right now for a variety of reasons. I think following Me Too and following the height of BLM, we had a lot of initiatives from the major studios and streamers and networks that focused on DEI. And since then, we've now seen the data to either support or not support the idea that has really made an impact. And unfortunately, it seems like there's kind of been maybe initial lifts and then plateaus. And unfortunately, Becca also said the words sharp decline a few times when she was going over the data earlier. So it is a little bit worrying to me that there has been sharp declines in minority writers, TV creators, female directors since 2019. And to me, that is, yes, like 2 years from 3 years, 4 years. I can't do math. I'm not a math person. Since the pandemic started, and also encompasses kind of the height of BLM and what's happened since then. And it takes 2 to 5 years really to get content made. And so now we're just beginning to see what would have come as a result of those two different things that kind of happened in parallel. And I'm a little bit worried about what will happen as the industry continues to face even more insecurity and more turmoil. Since the pandemic, we've now had the acceleration of the streaming model, and the bubble is bursting. Has burst, I would say. There's been a ton of layoffs, and now we're facing a writer's strike that may last a very long time. And so honestly, I don't think the outlook is particularly great, because in times of uncertainty, I think it gets a little bit shakier. And there's a return generally to what feels safe to a lot of the people who run these major companies. But that all said, all the doom and gloom that I've just brought onto all of this. I do feel hopeful because a lot of those companies are making an effort to be aware of their own inherent biases and take action against those. So like Netflix releasing their diversity report again, Lionsgate doing this report on first-time directors that we saw last week, increasing number of deals with women and BIPOC creators that we're seeing from the studios and networks. I feel like maybe it is hopeful, and I have heard personally a lot of efforts from studios and networks where they're talking about the financials and the actual financial incentives to increase diversity, which are definitely there.
Thank you, Monica. And you make your comments together with Dr. Haggard's comments make a really good point, right, about social progress, that we tend to have these myths that we get on the right side of history naturally. And of course, that doesn't happen. It's all about making sure that your foot is still on the gas pedal and constantly pushing for change, because the moment at which you do that, right, that the progress stops or even goes back down the hill. And also the fits and starts, right, that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Especially if you're actually shifting the social order, right? You're coming up against backlash, and backlash comes in many different forms, but one is going to something comfortable when there's, when there's an economic crisis. That's a form of backlash. And so anytime I see backlash, I think to myself, oh, well, must be doing something right. It's a real shift, right? So it's just a matter of taking the next 2 steps forward. Love that commentary and your wisdom and insight. Thank you. Christine, throwing it over to you. Why are we just not seeing progress in representation? Like everyone else here, you've been in the industry for decades. So why aren't we seeing that? And talk to us about the projects that you're doing and how your career has evolved and what you're working on now to change that, because I know you've kind of had a personal evolution too in terms of content creation and making better or more representative media.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I agree with Monica that the numbers are super discouraging. I mean, I haven't had a lot of time to analyze the report, and we definitely can't discount the impact of the pandemic, as Jennifer Newsom pointed out, and the numbers drop significantly when you count, Academy Award nominated films. But I wanted to speak for a second about that first. And that has to do with, as we probably all know this, but those numbers speak to who is voting in the Academy. And last year, 81% of the voters of the Academy Awards were white. 19% were not white. And I know they're trying to recruit more people of color, BIPOC people, other people into the Academy. But more work needs to be done. Now, they have done something that I thought was kind of interesting, and they've adopted representation and inclusion standards, which in their words are designed to encourage equitable representation on and off screen to better reflect the diverse global population. And in order for films to be deemed eligible, certain standards must be obtained. Now, I actually am a firm believer that change doesn't happen unintentionally, and that it does require careful review of the institutional practices that either promote or eradicate systemic discrimination. And so I'm feeling positive about that. And like Monica said, I'm excited when companies adopt certain practices or looking at their own practices and trying to figure out how to change things. We'll see how effective the Academy shift it will be. I mean, years ago, a lot of people talked about the inclusion writer, which we were talking about at the first Women's Media Summit, Caroline, and there was a lot of disagreement. And the problem with that, it relied on one person's ability to enforce the terms of the writer. And I was always skeptical of that because it requires larger full-scale changes, in my mind, to affect real change. But turning to the drop-in numbers, recently I read this article by Ingu Kang, I hope I pronounced her name right, titled, it was in the New Yorker, titled "The Oscars and the Pitfalls of Feel-Good Representation." And in it, she acknowledges that the Oscars do serve a function in that they bestow first-time awards, to artists. When they bestow first-time awards to artists in underrepresented communities, it's that feel-good thing. There's that positive feel-good factor. It makes us feel good and makes us feel like things are getting better, despite what we know the data to be the contrary. But then King, which is interesting to me, and I'm going to circle back to my own career. She also goes on to say that progress can't happen unless the industry does two things: not just offer artists of different backgrounds more opportunities, but empower them to tell the kinds of stories they want to tell. I would emphasize as well that those opportunities should be extended to actors and directors and writers, but also to production designers, editors, cinematographers. Why? Because when people are telling their stories, myself included, are telling my stories, it's so valuable to have collaborators who understand your experience. A person who's holding the camera and in what might be emotional moments for only you, if they can't understand that, it's very hard for them to capture those moments in kind of an authentic way. That's what I've been learning lately. The second part of that, what King was saying, is also interesting to me. The idea of progress in representation should also mean that the requirement for diverse material needs to be expanded, that it doesn't always have to deliver immediate satisfaction. We all love Crazy Rich Asians. And I tell people, one of the reasons why I believe I've gotten support for my film project is because of Crazy Rich Asians and the success of that. But sometimes that material doesn't always deliver the kind of satisfaction that an Academy Award winning film does. Some of the work is challenging, divisive, or self-critical. And it may not affirm viewers' insights on, may not affirm viewers, but it can reveal truths or new insights. And that's the issue that I grapple with and that I wanted to take on. I wanted to tell stories about my experience and my Native Hawaiian background. And not all of those stories are positive. You can't tell the full story of the Native Hawaiian peoples without telling a story about the consequences of years of colonization, colonialism, and exploitation. And many of those stories are devastating, and they lead to sometimes flawed characters. And so, to go back to the question, I'm so sorry, to go back to the question of, what am I working on? Yeah. I started, I've been producing in the film industry for 25 years, mostly in the independent film space. I've had films premiered every single full-scale festival in the world, and have had Academy Award, produced Academy Award nominated films. But what I realized is that I am not working on stories and devoting my energies to stories that tell my story. And so that, and I never, as a producer, I love producing. I love facilitating. I love working on several different projects at a time. But I finally got to the point where I realized that no one's going to tell my story unless I tell it. And no one is going to tell a story that is authentic to the Native Hawaiian experience. And I wouldn't even say mine is the same as every other Native Hawaiian, but it's authentic to that experience. Unless it's a person who is a Native Hawaiian. And so I just decided to take that turn in my career. It's sort of later than I probably should even be dreaming of writing and directing now.
Whenever.
It's it's the time, it was when I wanted to tell the story. And I couldn't have done it earlier. I might not have had the self-confidence. whatever it was. So it's just, my time now. And I'm grateful to organizations like Pacific Islanders and Communications who decided that, my story, which is a lovely story, trust me, you're going to feel good after you see it. But at the same time, it does depict some Hawaiian characters who in not the most positive light. And actually, I remember showing a rough draft of my film to certain Native Hawaiians, family members and whatever. And they were just like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can want you to show that image of ourselves. It's, there's one thing, we don't have enough images of us out there that are non-stereotypical. And maybe, we don't know if we're totally comfortable with this. And ultimately, I mean, I have to be true to myself, but I think that that is a challenge. And so when we talk about progress, we also need to talk about progress in, allowing, if we want these stories to be told, we have to allow the truth to come out. We have to allow people to tell stories that are truthful and authentic.
And you did that with Older Than America, right? The Bradley
Yes.
Cooper film, you
Actually,
focused on.
You're right. I dipped my toe in a film called Older Than America. It wasn't my story. It was a story by the director, Georgina Lightning. And that was a very learning experience. It took me 10 years to write my own story, but it was about the cultural genocide in the Native American community. And in that film, here's this woman telling this story of a family story. And we had Native Americans come and protest our film. When we had an extras casting call, Native Americans came, 850 people showed up in northern Minnesota. I didn't even know there were that many people up there. And they showed up to protest our film because we were showing not necessarily Native Americans a negative light, but we were going to show the Sundance, which is traditional ceremony, and the sweat ceremony. And so they protested that. And we were able to help them understand that. And some people just didn't want us to tell the story about the Native American experience in these schools. It was too devastating. It was too hard. There were some people who were in our film who hadn't spoken about it for 50 years. And so that's something we also have to confront when we talk about representation. We have to also say, well, we need to find places that are going to accept these stories that are truthful. So, I don't know if that fully answered your question, but yes, I'm on that path. These are the stories I'm telling. We're editing my film project that was supported by Pacific Islanders and Communications and others, and hopefully it will be done soon, in a month or so.
Yeah, and your evolution, evolution might be the wrong term, but the ways in which you're finding your voice in filmmaking after, American Splendor nominated for how many Academy Awards, it's really inspirational. Thank you, Christine. And Joy, next question is for you, and I'm gonna pepper you with maybe multiple questions. It would be great if you could talk about SEMI and the work that you're doing and how we can support your work, but also weave in your own unique approach to doing this work, because it's safe to say your books advance a very, very unique approaches to how to navigate, right, a lack of representation in a world that is damaging and harmful to lots of marginalized folks. So how do you do this work yourself? What are your lenses? What are you bringing to this? And how can we help SEMI? What is SEMI doing and how can we help SEMI?
Thank you for that question. I've been enjoying listening to everything that everyone was saying, and so much what Christine was saying about how long it took her to get to her story resonate with me a lot. I've always been artistic. I've always been a storyteller, even when I didn't realize that I was a storyteller, even when I didn't realize that my creativity was part of my healing modalities for myself. I was constantly questioning these narratives in the world, because these stories that we see on screen, they are not just things that we watch and that we listen to, they actually live within us, and they contribute a lot of times to how we are trying to cope through trauma or how we are seeing our possibilities within the world. When I say that I'm dedicated to the psycho-spiritual aspects of storytelling, when you think about things that are psychophysical, for example, like if you have a backpack on and you get it to a hill and you're hiking, your brain is going to show you that the hill is steeper than it actually is, so that you understand that that weight you're carrying on your back is going to require more effort from you physically in order to make it up the hill. So when I think about psycho-spiritual, I think about when all of this stuff is heaped on your spirit, and you come to the hills you are trying to climb in your life, how much steeper does that hill look to you, look to your spirit for the journey that you are trying to have as a human being, right? And so co-founding See Me, I think, was a natural progression of the work that I was doing. I didn't know that I was going to be an activist, but I had no choice but to be an activist because I'm unruly. And I was not going to just sit idly by and not use media as the primary social institution in which to affect change. And when I met Monica and Nicole shared the research that she had done, and I'll let her talk a little bit more about that in relation to her dissertation, we're like, oh my God, we can actually look at this work that she did, looking at the production code era and the rating system, and how we're not actually past these things that were put in place to restrict how bodies could be seen on screen. We literally came across things where theater owners in North and South Carolina has said that they were not, this was 1939, and they said they were not willing to show a movie in their theaters that had Blacks and whites on screen together. They were upset that Hollywood producers were just slapping Black people and white people together on screen all willy-nilly. And they were only willing to show those movies on screen if the Black bodies were shown in a servile capacity to the white people, right? And so those movies got made, and that created a comp. And Hollywood never course corrected itself from the comp that got created, right? To go back a little bit, one day I started to ask myself, what is going on with me? And the response was, I believe I am fragmented. And then I said, how did I get fragmented? And I looked at the stories that I had inherited, right? The things that were coming to me on the screen. And I said, I think that these things are part of what has contributed to the fragmentation that I feel within myself. This is part of why I even wrote my most recent book, Show Us Your Fire, because I wanted to really look at these stories, how it lives in our soft tissue, how it is part of the reason why your jaw is clenched. I grew up in the South. I have been in a hospital with an older Black person who survived Jim Crow, who is in serious need of medical attention. And I have watched them perform health because they were scared that if these white people saw that they were sick and disabled, they would kill them, because that is what they remembered from being in Jim Crow. These stories, we're not past them. And Hollywood has not corrected how it went about making these movies, what got funded and what didn't get funded, right? What got greenlit, who should be a main character, who should be supporting, how that support should show up, who should be able to just die, be killed in the progress of the hero, what the heroics of the story even are. So with our work with See Me, we started to ask people, how are you actually living with these stories right now? What does that actually look like for you? How do you unpack a lot of this, right? So we wanted to actually get with people with what they're experiencing right now, like what they are literally watching as we speak, and use this research. And again, we've been expounding on what Nicole has started with her dissertation to actually show that the past is not past, right? And you're looking at something, you're thinking that, oh, it's just these leaves in the tree, or it's the blooms on the branch. But no, let's actually go down, let's take you through the tree, let's take you to the roots. No, let's actually take you within the soil, right? And so that historical trajectory, understanding that actually is what literally lets you understand exactly where you are right now. That is the actual here. The here is not just within this moment and what you think you're seeing, it's seeing the holistic aspect of what the journey of the thing you're grappling with has been. And so one of our latest projects is called Now Watching. And again, it's about what people are literally watching as we speak, so that they look at, okay, this thing that you're seeing, this stereotype you keep seeing around certain, fat bodies, these things you keep seeing around disabled people are not seeing disabled people at all, as if they don't actually exist. The stories that you see around Black bodies, the kinds of ways that Native bodies get to show up on screen, if they even do, the lack of conversation about Native futures, right? The lack of conversation about people of color in space. All of it is tethered to this historical trajectory. And so we can look at literally what you are consuming right now and take it back to, this is how it started, this is how it grown, this is how it got funded. These stories have an economy. And because they are an economy, they have stakeholders, they have shareholders, they have investors, they have people that have gone ahead and used it as a way to make money, even if they didn't even agree with all the aspects of it. And then they have people that don't even understand what they're buying into, what they've been using as a means of storytelling device and trope and everything else, because they just got taught this is the right way to make films. This is common sense. This is how you should go about telling a story, not understanding this is what is actually steeped in. So that's kind of how the weaving of it has come along for me in relation to what we're doing at CME.
Oh, thank you, Joy. I feel so energized for the work after listening to this panel and looking at the personal aspect of how folks are approaching, what's really a marathon, race, fight. I like that metaphor better, maybe. Nicole, do you want to speak a bit about CME and the work and how that fits in with everything we've already been discussing?
Yeah, I think I love how Joy teed up our new initiative. We had been doing a lot of working with industry professionals for a long time, right? And involved with groups like y'all and doing the data. And Joy and Monica and I came together and we were like, what's the point, right? Like, what do we actually care about? And the thing that we actually care about when we're talking about, we care about how people put images on screen is because of how it impacts the people watching it and the impact that has on society. That's why all of us want to make more expansive representation, because we know the impact that it has. And I love the experience in the classroom where I have kids who took my classes 10 years ago, and they're like, I was watching this thing the other day and I thought about the representation, or I can never watch movies the same way again. My dream would be to have that impact on everyone, right? It's like my pinky in the brain, right? How can we all transform our relationship to the content that we're watching? And that's really why we started Now Watching, is because we wanted to be able to go into spaces that wouldn't traditionally call us in, which would be like studios and consulting like that, but really to go to like a pharmaceutical company, right? And be like, hey, you've already done your DEI 101, bring us in and we'll have the next conversation about the thing everyone loves talking about, what they're watching, and how can we have a deeper conversation with you to really help you transform your inner work so that on the outer level, we're all having a different relationship to what we're watching and how we show up in the world with each other. And I think that full circle idea of like what is going on in our culture right now related to like care and community, I think that's a space that we're seeing transformation into, obviously pummeled forward by the pandemic. And even watching how my students are responding to content that 2 years ago they loved. So I'm thinking right now of Euphoria, right? So like 2 years ago, they were all like super excited about Euphoria. And then this year they did a presentation about the representation of lesbians and like the hypersexualization of lesbians. And we're really calling out Euphoria and being like, what is that teaching us as young girls who are grappling with our sexuality, that the representation of hypersexualized lesbian sex on screen, what that means for us? And they were, pointing to quite a few different movies, award-winning movies, right, that had done that. And some of them even took a sex scene that they had been involved in, that they were an actor in, and they recut it to really show us what the difference would be. And that's speaking to what Christine was talking about that personal connection to the content that you're putting on screen, and how does that transform that, right? So, I think this real vision of how does the personal connect to the societal. And for us, that's like what's on screen is the main societal factor that we're really focused on. And so, yeah, we're
Well, that
excited
is
to bring
such a
that.
good segue, Nicole, into
Okay.
the question that everybody has. And we're going to go rapid fire because we do want to get to some audience questions, right? So folks, put your questions in the Q&A. We'll go quickly. But this is just going to be a real rapid fire. What are we watching from 2022, 2023, and why do we love it, right? So good media. I'm going to start with the most obvious, which would be Abbott Elementary, that has so many Black characters that Christine, you had talked about kind of putting the dirty laundry out, right? Or representing characters in a way that not stereotypically, but like in a negative light. Abbott Elementary has so many Black characters that all of them are rich and deep and some are flawed. And we just don't see that very often, right? How about you, Becca? Put you on the spot. What do you want? What are you watching in 2022, 23?
I don't know that this is something I recommend, but I watch a lot of the like love reality shows, and for so long they've just been the same people in those shows, right? Like straight, small, white people. And so I've been kind of excited and also scared to see all of this diversity happening in those spaces. With you have the Queer Ultimatum coming up that's going to have all queer people in it. I know that there's a whole other conversation around all of the issues involved in reality TV and how we treat people in reality TV and all of that. But just to see fat people finding love in reality TV and, older people and queer people has been really exciting. But if you had given me more time, I could have come up with something I was more proud of, but that is my contribution.
I'm sure that there are tons of reality TV viewers who are thinking the same thing. How about you, Christine? What's the thing you recommend?
Okay, I'm going to say a podcast. Julia Louis-Dreyfus's Wiser Than Me podcast. I love it.
Yes.
And she talks to women who she deems wiser than her. I just heard the Darlene Love podcast, and she talks to Jane Fonda and Isabel Allende. The thing is it's just so great to hear from the wisdom from these women and who are older than 50, and it's just really inspirational, of course, to me, but I think making my husband and daughters listen to it as well, because it's great.
Awesome. Yes, all forms of media included. Monica, what do you recommend?
So it's API Heritage Month, so I'm gonna talk about angry and messy Asians, which is something that is having a moment and I'm really excited about. Of course, there's Beef, and then Polite Society, which is in theaters right now. And I'm super excited about Joyride, which comes out in July. And it's basically like The Hangover or Bridesmaids, but with 4 Asian girls.
Yes.
Yay! Cannot wait. Love to be. I know controversy there too. Love. How about you, Nicole? What do you recommend?
The mom side of me recommends Working Moms because it's messy and fun and they delve into a lot of issues. But the thing that I super am loving is the new Fresh Prince of Bel-Air. It's called Bel-Air. It's on Peacock. I love it for a couple reasons. One, what a beautiful example of a remake, because Hollywood loves to just recycle. So I think it's an example of something that was actually done really well. And two, they take these characters that we all grew up with and then like add on the complex layers of structural issues that made them who they are, that we didn't get in the first one as intense, and they bring them to the modern era. And so it really is this beautiful portrayal of how the structural becomes personal. So I'm loving it.
Wonderful.
And it's fun and easy and all trashy too. It's great. All the best things.
Yes, the reason why we love our media. How about you, Joy? What do you recommend?
Okay, I'm finally getting into Reservation Dogs because that was on my list for a minute. I hadn't gotten a chance to see it. So I love me some surrealism. And now that Atlanta is completed, I'm now getting my, native surrealism through Reservation Dogs. So I'm really enjoying that. Swarm, which I'm still processing, and I'm not even quite sure how I felt about all of it, but I have never seen a character like that before and a story told that way. So it's just really kept me gripped. And then Sex Life. I really enjoyed the latest.
Yes, I
Look,
forgot about that.
I really enjoyed the latest season of Sex Life. It was messy, it was complex. They went ahead and called things out. They're like, when I was watching the first season, I was like, they need to talk about that. They don't need to gloss over that. Like that was not a factor. And they went ahead and like dug into it. And I just thought it was really layered and interesting. So those are my things that I'm paying attention to.
All right, all good content.
Dr. Heldman, what are you?
I did Abbott Elementary, but you know,
Okay.
I
Yes, you did
also
Abbott
I'll also recommend The Last of Us.
Oh yeah.
I had some serious criticisms, and I still do, of the killing off of Black girls. Sorry,
Mhm.
spoiler.
Mhm.
But there are great representations of marginalized folks, queer folks, BIPOC. It's just really great. And the lead, obviously, very complicated notions of masculinity, a Latin lead. I don't know. I love the show. And it really gets you thinking about issues of identity too, in terms of the storyline and the arc. So we have actually a question in the chat. Maybe it's just a question to me, but it's actually for you, Becca. And it's a question about fat representations and why we have seen so little progress in the past decade when it comes to body size representations and what we can do about that.
Sure. Well, I'll put my 2 cents in, but I think everybody here can answer that. I've been working in media research for about 7 years now, and it's just in the last few years that we've been able to get people to think about body size. And when I say people, I mean studio executives, content creators, to consider body size an identity worth fighting for, right? So just the simple argument that fat phobia and fighting for fat representation is a social justice issue was the first hump we needed to get over. And now I think Dr. Haggard and Carol and Dr. Heldman mentioned also that there's this feeling that we're on the horizon and that you're starting to hear conversations about fatness in media happening. And so I do feel like we're going to see some real progress in the next 10 years. But that said, it does feel like it's hard to even talk about good representations of fat people when we still have to make the case for fat people being in media at all. So I don't know if that answered it really well, but I'd love to hear other people's thoughts too.
Other thoughts on that, Dr. Haggard? Looked like you had a thought.
I just yes-anding everything you said, Becca. I mean, I think we're definitely hearing the conversation be a conversation, and that's great. And even just this understanding, I could talk about this all day. So are there any other questions? But if you want to
that's it. Go for it.
Hit me up and we'll talk about it some more.
Yes. Well, so we have we are actually out of time. So let me just say thank you to this amazing panel, and I will pass the baton to Christine to close us out.
Oh man, well, thank you all for sharing your stories, for employing your amazing talents to bring art, the beautiful and the ugly, into the world, and supporting art, the beautiful and the ugly, and for working hard to hold accountable those industries that define the cultural narrative, those industries that define us to the rest of the world. I hope something that someone said here will inspire you all to participate in what in our 7th year I will proudly call a movement that we started 7 years ago. And in closing, I would love to invite you to go to the Representation Project website, look at the report, and go to the back and look at the action steps that we outlined at the first Media Summit. That was a call to action to get involved in so many ways to address these issues. They're as relevant today as they were back then, and maybe together we can create change.
Thank you all so much. That wraps our annual State of the Media Summit. Go out and make media and therefore the world a better place.
Woo.
Bye.
Bye, thank you.